Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first panel discussion titled Strategies to Ask Job Market. My name is Menglong Xu. I'm a postdoc at Whitehead Institute. It is my pleasure today to co-moderate with Dr. Corinne Jackman-Burden, who is a postdoc at Carnegie Mellon University. Before we start, I want you to remind everyone that there will be a nationwide test of the emergency alert system, which is happening 2 minutes away at 2:20. So everyone will receive the alert from your cell phone. Okay, it's happening now.
It just happened. Thank you for the heads up.
Okay, I think it's done. Welcome back, everyone. So security effective position in higher education is a pursuit that not only requires unwavering dedication, but also strategic approaches. The fact job market is a landscape of opportunity, innovation, and transformation, but it can also be one with complexities and uncertainties. Today, we are honored to have 4 panelists who have recently launched their labs across different universities and different departments. They have graciously agreed to share their insights, expertise, and real-world advice with all of you in this journey of job search. First of all, thank you all for the panelists for joining us today. I'd like to ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves with names, affiliation, and research interests, and anything else they want to add. Dr. Lee, would you like to kick us off?
Hey everyone, I'm Teresa Lee, an assistant professor at UMass Lowell, and I use C. elegans to understand transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. So my entire career has been really focused on chromosome structure, especially in the germline. And I am currently in my 4th year as a professor. So I started my lab in 2020.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, hi, Dr. Rashdi. We're doing introduction part. Would you please introduce briefly your name, affiliation, research interest, and anything else you want to add to us?
Oh, perfect. So the session already started and you have your audience there as well?
Yeah, we just got started. Perfect timing.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be with you today. My name is Mohammed. I've started at Dana-Farber 4 years ago. And before that, I did my postdoctoral work first at the Whitehead Institute and then moved to Children's Hospital. And before that, I did my PhD at University of Minnesota. So our lab is focused on translational immunology. We do protein engineering to develop new immunotherapeutics and imaging probes to look at immune system.
Thank you, Dr. Knight.
Hi, my name is Ryan Nett. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology at Harvard University. So far, I think I'm the newest faculty on the panel. I've been here for just over a year and enjoying it so far. And in my lab, we study plant biochemistry with a specific focus on trying to understand how plants build medicinal small molecules so we can potentially harness that chemistry for easier access to valuable plant compounds.
Thank you. And Dr. Sanchez-Rivera.
Hi, everyone. My name is Francisco Sanchez-Rivera, and I'm an assistant professor of biology at MIT, and my lab is at the Koch Institute for Integrated Cancer Research. And we're broadly interested in genetic variation and how that influences disease, particularly in the context of cancer. And we study that by using emerging technologies related to genome engineering. And thank you for the invitation.
Great. Thank you again for joining us. We'll begin with the questions we have prepared and collected from our fellows. At the same time, for the audience, please feel free to post your questions using the chat box throughout the session, and we'll organize the questions coming in. And at the end of the session, we will have a 10-minute Q&A session led by Dr. Corinne Jackman-Burden. And to start with, I'd like to ask a question: what does being a faculty mean to you? And why did you choose to be a faculty? Have you ever considered a different career path during graduate or postdoc training?
So maybe I can get started here. To me, being a faculty, I see it as a unique opportunity to both do what I consider what I do for fun and interesting. So I don't really see it as a traditional job in that sense. And in addition to doing what I find interesting and fun and fulfilling, I'm also able to have a very significant impact in society, both because of the science, but also because of the students and other trainees that I'm able to mentor and train in the lab. And also based on where I am, there's also a component of teaching, which I also very much enjoy. And so that combination of having impact in society, both through the science, but also in the students by both training them and teaching them while doing what I am excited to do every day, I think it's the perfect mix of things that one would probably want in a career. In terms of thinking about other options, of course, I think everyone at some point, particularly in grad school where things kind of go down, you start questioning whether this is something that you may be talented and able to do in the long term. And I had those moments, but I always kept going back to the fact that I truly enjoy what I do, and science is most things fail to some extent, and then you enjoy the victories, and there are many types of victories in this career. So I wouldn't do anything else right now, at least.
I guess I can add to that, Ms. Francisco, so well, in terms of the benefits of being a faculty member. We have a lot of independence in what we pursue. And for me, because I'm at an institution where research and teaching are about 50-50, one of the things that appeals to me about this balance is the opportunity to interact with students at many levels. So both in a classroom in a real sense, but also being able to have research trainees in my own lab that I get to mentor and shape. So when I was exploring the other types of careers, especially during my PhD, it was asking, what is it that I like doing in my day-to-day job? And then eventually coming back around to the idea that being a faculty member allows me the right balance of being able to focus on the science and still train and develop other people. And they come to me because I'm a professor. It's very easy to get to them.
Dr. Rashidin, would you want to
Sure.
share?
Yes. No, that's great. As Teresa mentioned, and also Francisco mentioned, I think you have a lot of freedom in terms of what is it that you really enjoy to do in academia, and you also get the chance to interact with the students, and so there is a lot of really interesting and fun things that you can do in academia. I do want to mention that for me personally, I always wanted to go to academia from like early college days. I was thinking that I want to be a scientist. But then at some point in my postdoc, I I've seen a lot of friends who go to industry and they say, oh, it's great and we enjoy this, it's awesome, you should try this. And I was fortunate to be able to try a period of working in industry, like at the end of my postdoc and before starting at Dana-Farber, I could join a biotech for a couple of months just to see what's going on in industry. And it exceeded my expectation. It was really awesome. And it was great. So I do want to also mention that both paths are exciting. You can do really exciting work both in industry and academia. The type of work could be different. In industry, what immediately caught my attention is that the teamwork is very strong in industry, like everyone focuses on one project and you have a lot of kind of same peers. Whereas in academia, postdocs, graduate students, they really want to lead one project, get first author paper. That's not an issue in industry. It's more focused on like, as a team, you want to focus and like drive something forward. So both paths are exciting based on my experience. It really depends to your personality and like, what is it that would make you most excited? That's my 2 cents.
And I suppose to add in my 2 cents as well on all of this, I don't think I have anything too different or profound to say that anybody really hasn't, but I guess just to sort of state and I guess reiterate the things that have been really important to me, especially working within academia. Of course, there's the element of intellectual freedom, feeling like I can explore what I find to be interesting and important. And I think part of it for me has been what I feel to be this energy being on a university campus, and whether that's among students or among faculty, but really this place where we can sort of bounce many different ideas off of people with different expertise from us, learn something from the people that we're teaching along the way, and hopefully use all of this to be at the sort of forefront of experimental research. And at a personal level, I really like sort of this. I've had this experience both from grad school all the way through my postdoc to being a faculty member, where I really have a lot of agency, both in terms of intellectual freedom, but also in terms of how I carry out my day-to-day. I think it's really nice to have that flexibility in terms of the lab environment in academia. And this is pretty much what I've always wanted to do, so I can't comment on too much in other career paths, but yeah, I've enjoyed it a lot, and I'm happy I chose this path.
Thank you all for sharing. Followed by that, once someone's determined in developing a career in academia, how can they know if they are ready for that? Or how to better have a sense of when to start applying for a faculty position?
I'd actually like to start by passing on advice that I got from my own postdoc mentor. So I felt, as many postdocs might be feeling right now, very panicky, a little bit dire about my prospects of getting a faculty position. And the advice I was getting, I was in an NIH ERECTA program, so we had a lot of professional development for us, and everyone kept telling us to start applying early and applying often. But what my mentor reminded me about is that the goal isn't to get the job. The goal is to succeed in the job and not feel like you want to die because you're not yet ready for it. So I think it's really a question of getting a sense of what the position will ask of you by paying attention to other junior faculty, especially at different kinds of institutions. And then asking, am I ready to be successful once I have that position? So do I have an idea for not just the first grant, but the second grant that you're going to need to get? Am I bringing preliminary data with me that I can start cranking out publications once I'm in that position? Do I feel prepared to be in charge of other people's dissertations? Am I ready to sort of spin off a project and give it to a postdoc? And so I think knowing that that's what you have to do to hit the ground running, especially at research intensive institutions, it will help you get a sense of if you're ready to start once you get there. But I think many trainees are very focused on getting to the next step and forgetting that we're in it for the marathon, right? It's not just getting the job. It's trying to keep your head above water once you're already in it.
So maybe I can go next. I agree with everything Teresa said. She put it very nicely. And a few things that I want to add based on my experience and me seeing students and postdocs over the years in both grad school and postdocs labs, and how their careers develop, is that I think maybe nowadays there's a trend of putting too much emphasis on applying or trying to get a faculty job quickly. And I think that's not always the right decision or advice to give, because if you do it too quickly, well, in reality, you are going to have one, maybe two opportunities to get a faculty job as a PI somewhere. And so you want to make sure that when you take that step and you start preparing for that step, it's the right time and that you're not rushing into it, because once you get there, it's essentially like a domino effect. You start too early, you're not at the right spot, things are not progressing at the same time, your reputation and track record are not built. That's all going to affect grants, publications, and then you're always playing catch up. And you're always going to be playing some amount of catching up, of course. But I would definitely want to stress not to be in a rush just because people are advising you to be in a rush. So I think that gets into when do you feel like you're ready to take the next step. And I think this will vary by lab, advisor, research, career interest, institution that you're targeting. But I think universally, I think it should be when you start feeling like you start questioning yourself, why am I starting things in my postdoc lab when in reality, a number of those ideas or projects are really coming originally from you, and you see the long-term potential of those, and that doesn't necessarily fit the timeline within your postdoc. So if you're thinking about projects or initiating projects that will take realistically 5 years to initiate, it's good if you leave some of those behind in your postdoc lab, but I think it's also diagnostic of you having sufficient independence to start moving on. The second one is, I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that I could give someone that's interested in being a PI is to try to get experience in writing at some point during your postdoctoral career, because a lot of this career is essentially writing grants, manuscripts, grants, brief proposals for a donor, letters of recommendation, lots of different things, and not getting that opportunity early on in your career would affect you, and it'll be, I think, hard to get that level of experience while on the job. So I think try to do that, and when you feel like you've gotten closer to knowing how to put together some of those documents, I think that's another element of the whole process. And then the third one that I would definitely advise everyone is to try to get some mentoring or managing experience, because once you start a lab, you're essentially mentoring and managing a group of people. Sometimes it could feel like you're just managing, but in reality, you're managing people and mentoring and training people. And I think it's also a hard lesson to learn while you're on the job, learning to write, learning to mentor, and all of these things combined, all of a sudden you're on your own. So once you, I think, get those 3, maybe 4 elements in to a level where you think that you have at least some of those already present in your career, combined with a body of work that you think will be published or submitted, or it's already published, that distances you to some extent from your PI in the future, I think that's when it's time. I realize it might sound like it's a lot of things that you need to do, and maybe it'll take forever, but in reality, some of these things you can start early on, including getting experience on some of these things. So again, piece of advice: don't rush just because someone is telling you that you need to do it in year 3 or 4 of your postdoc. I honestly don't think it makes a lot of sense.
Great. Ryan, would you like to go next, or?
Yeah, actually just jumping off of one of Francisco's points really quickly, and this is really more like personal anecdote than actual like real career advice, but I remember somewhere several years into my postdoc, um, my wife commented to me at the time that I was doing a lot of sort of contemplating, and you can almost say complaining about, you know, what my status was in the lab. And I think what was coming across to her was that it just sounded like I had sort of moved past the point of where I was really sort of in this like really like learning position within my postdoc, to where I'd sort of had this maybe not mastery, but like, you know, I'd sort of gotten over the hump of learning the system in the new lab, and I was taking projects in a new direction, and I was mentoring a few people on those projects. And to her, it just sounded like, oh, just you're ready to move on and have your own group. You're very opinionated because I think you have these new directions and you've sort of carved out this independent space. It sounds like it's time. And I think like when I reflected on that, I was like, oh yeah, I think that's kind of like the root of how I'm feeling right now. It's just like there's a lot of new directions, and I feel like I kind of have ownership over these things. And for me personally, that was kind of a time where I felt like I think I'm ready to go apply for my own position. I think I sort of have the bandwidth and the ideas that could carry a lab forward in that sort of, you know, 5-year time frame that you want to be thinking about. So like I said, that was just sort of like my personal realization. It's kind of maybe like a wishy-washy, you'll know when you know type of thing, but I was definitely feeling that sort of like it was time to fly from the nest type of mentality.
Wonderful. I mean, you guys already mentioned everything. So what I can add to these really good advice and points that you had is that for me, a personal also an experience was that, you know, I started interviewing, maybe it was about beginning of the 4th year of my postdoc, and then I went to USC. I gave a talk, they didn't give me the job, and then I did a couple more interviews, Skype interviews, other thing, and then suddenly I started getting offers. And I think what really changed was that I became better in telling a compelling story. And I feel like when you think that you can actually give a very good, compelling story, that would be a good time to go and give your job talk. If you think you're not there and you can't give a comprehensive, nice story, which would resonate to your audience, maybe that's early. So you want to be sure that you're ready for that point, that, you know, you have a very good story to tell. The other thing which I think helped me was that, you know, apply for one of these K awards at NIH. And if you can get one of those like K22, K99, those things also help. And it's not only about bringing money, it's that you basically are telling your, you know, wherever you apply, that you know how to write a grant, you know how to successfully write a grant. And, you know, this is important. The fact that, you know, if you can apply for postdoctoral fellowships, definitely do that. Again, it's not about bringing the money. It is, you know, it's good, but it's more so that you can actually write, you can actually put something that is fundable and is convincing together. So that's really important. So yeah, these are my thoughts here.
Thank you so much for sharing. And since some of you mentioned about funding K99, I would like to ask a related question. So how can applicants appropriately demonstrate their ability to raise funding, especially for people who did not have any experience in getting any fellowship or funding before?
So maybe I can just give my 2 cents on this. One thing that I would suggest all of you at the postdoctoral, but even grad school level, is to inquire or even push your advisor to include you in writing some aspects of grants, or they can be small grants, or they can be big grants, or they can be NIH level grants. I think it's very important to get as much practice early on as you can, because some of the writing is almost like a different language to some extent. I mean, no one teaches you until you do it how to put together, say, a budget justification or what does it mean to write a summary, and how is a summary different from an abstract in an NIH grant or R01? What is significance, innovation? How are those different? These are all things that you can learn later on by reading 70 pages of some manual in NIH, and good luck with that. Or you can learn as much as you can while practically speaking. So contributing to grants, even just filling out progress reports on NIH grants, anything that you can get your hands on in terms of practice is very useful for that. And even though that wouldn't necessarily go to your CV, my point here is that your advisor can then comment on those in the letters of recommendation, even if you don't, end up applying for your own independent funding, or whether you get a K99 or a K-like award or not. The fact that you contributed to writing some of those documents, hopefully ended up being funded, a fraction of them, is something that the advisor could put in a letter. So I think that's very important.
I would say, on a related note, an area that can be useful for demonstrating your ability to raise funds is if you have the opportunity to ever help plan a conference or part of a conference or any sort of meeting that's happening at your university. Oftentimes this comes along with trying to raise some amount of money, and it, depending on the scope of the conference, it might not be an incredible sum, but I think, as Francisco was mentioning, if somebody that you're working with, somebody that's writing a letter, can point to that you were involved in that process and that you successfully got money, even if it was for just like a local symposium for that day at your university, that's demonstrating you can convince somebody to give you money to support your science. And I think that can go a long way as well. And I sort of get the idea that there's a lot of opportunities for this. Sometimes it's hard to convince people to help out with conference organizing. So there might be a lot of opportunities to do these types of things as a trainee.
And then I guess other sort of more professional development oriented things to take advantage of at your institution. Many places now have grantsmanship workshops. Often, I think as a postdoc, I was welcome to attend them, although they weren't always advertised to me. So it's asking the faculty development office, or if the grants office runs these workshops, you can at least say that you've attended, so you have an awareness of it, independent of whether you're able to submit your own grant or help your PI with their writing too. So you're just having awareness of the language and the expectations, especially across different kinds of funding mechanisms. And then the way that you would demonstrate that in your application is to show that you're aware that there is more out there in the world than just an R01. So when you're writing your research proposal, you can indicate what might be appropriate for an R21 or an R03, or if you're at an institution that's eligible for other kinds of funding, because I'm at a minority serving institution, I'm aware that the R16 exists, or I know that I'm R15 eligible. And so doing that, especially if you can span funding agencies like NSF and NIH, if you're aware of the foundations that fund your work and the kinds of grants they apply, you're showing that you're doing your homework. So even if you have not yet gotten your own grant, you might be able to be a little bit ahead of people who just aren't aware of what the landscape might look like.
Great. And, I would add that what really helped me personally was that I could get some applications that were successfully funded. So for example, if you're writing a K award, find a colleague who did it and who got it. Get a copy of that, take a good look at it. And then, that really helps you. And the other thing is that you can take initiative, as Teresa mentioned, take initiative and say, you have this idea, talk to your PI, and just put together an R21 application. And then hopefully your PI will read it as well. And then just submit it. You get feedback. It's just really, you want to practice. It's not something that overnight you're going to develop this skill. You really need to spend some time and work on it.
Thank you so much for the insights. And next question is about reference letter. As we know, reference letter is a critical component in application. So who can you identify as a strong letter writer for you? And what will be considered as a good combination of letter writers for application?
Okay, maybe I can start this one. I think there are many ways to answer this. My recommendation would be and it depends on how you're working, but for example, if you have if you're collaborating with other labs and you have, say, a main collaboration that you're very excited and have put a lot of effort on it, I think that will be a great letter of recommendation to have. And so I would definitely advise that you cultivate that relationship in terms of, you know, being a good collaborator, but also ensuring that that person knows about your work, not necessarily only the collaboration, and that you stay in touch with them. So that would be one very strong letter that you could have, because that one would be able to comment not only on your science, but also your ability to collaborate with other people. And a lot of the faculty search committees are also looking for a potential collaborator or a colleague that is not only going to work for their own research program, but that they see as integrating into the community in the right way. The other type of recommender, by the way, I'm just, in addition to your grad school advisor and your postdoc advisor, which I think are two core ones. If you are part of weekly or bi-weekly or every other month meetings at your institution, that is definitely one very attractive and important source of recommendation letters, because those people are seeing your work ideally evolve over a certain number of years as a postdoc. They've seen it from the beginning until maybe the very end. And if you give, you know, make sure that the presentations are great and you're treating every talk like it's essentially a job talk to some extent, people say this sometimes, they'll remember about your work, and they'll be able to comment on how your work evolved from maybe initial ideas to a mature product at the end. And then I think the other ones could be from either someone that maybe invited you as a speaker to a conference that knows your work very well, or someone within the field that you work on that is able to comment on the quality of the work and the impact in the field, but also ideally you as a person as well, and how you fit in the whole field. So in that sense, publishing and talking about science is not the only thing. It's also important to connect with these people so that they can write a more, you know, customized letter that is less generic than what anyone could write based on receiving a CV and a list of papers. So I think that would be a nice mix. And most places would ask for 3 letters, others ask for 5. So if you're able to submit 5, I think you can supplement it with some of these other recommendations.
I'd like to add one additional kind of letter from the perspective of any institution that requires teaching. And also, institutions are now beginning to care a lot about identifying colleagues who will help promote equity and diversity in their departments or at their institution. So it's being mindful that your PI sees one aspect of you. What other aspects would you like to show? And then I love that you asked this question, because hopefully you have a few years. So show those aspects to other people and start cultivating them as your letter writers. So if you know that you will have to teach a class, can anyone comment on what you're like working with any kind of student? So you can say, yes, I have met an undergraduate student, and I understand what they're capable of and what I can do with them. Has anyone seen the way that you mentor or manage a group or large projects? So they can talk about your ability to do service or collegiality. And then you can also invite people to your guest lectures or offer to guest lecture for them to, again, showcase different aspects of your ability to communicate. So I think realizing that, I think most of my applications would accept 5 letters, but 3 to 4 was the norm. So it's like your PhD advisor, your postdoc advisor, who are those other 2 people? And in what ways can they bolster you as a whole colleague that maybe your PIs aren't always going to be able to emphasize as much because they need to focus a lot on the work that you did in their lab?
Ryan, would you like to comment or?
I think I'm just gonna voice my support for the previous 2 explanations. I think they covered everything that I was thinking about for my own letters of recommendation. So nicely said, both of you.
Great, great. I want to add just one comment here, and that is, you know, when I was thinking about recommendation letters, you know, there is 2 ideas that, you know, who is more famous? Should I ask for that person to write me a letter? I mean, obviously you have a postdoc advisor, a PhD advisor, but you at least need a 3rd one, and then you may have different options. So I don't think you want to necessarily go with the person that is more famous. I think you want to think about who is capable to write a more meaningful letter for you. And you want to make sure that, you know, whoever's writing the letter have some experience working with you. You know, these famous people are nice, you know, they may have seen you, they may know you, and they can write something, but that letter will not have any weight. It actually may be it may not be even to your benefit, because they may not write something very strong because they don't know you well. And so you want to make sure that you ask someone who actually knows you and worked with you, and that would be a meaningful letter. So that's my only things that I wanted to add here.
Thank you so much for the insights. Since many of you brought out the topic of let yourself and your work known by others before going to job market, I have a related question. So how helpful is it to publicize your work before entering the job market? And what are some effective ways to do so?
How is it, so the question is how important it is to publish before going to job market?
To publicize, to let people know your work.
Okay, how to publicize, okay.
I think it's, of course, better if people know the work than if they don't. That said, with time, I've realized that sometimes this might be somewhat overdone to the point where it maybe affects the person's career to some extent. So, for instance, if you have to worry about publicizing your work in 4 to 5 different platforms of social media, you know, that definitely, you need to factor that time. You need to take it into account as to how that affects everything else that you're doing. So I think that there should be a balance of publicizing the work that is published, maybe as a preprint or a peer-reviewed manuscript, but also thinking about what's next, because you always need to be thinking about what's next. You know, this career will not end with just one manuscript or one preprint that is submitted. So I think I'm just saying this, and maybe it sounds weird, but I think there should be a balance of these two. The other one is that one way that you actually have control of publicizing your work, even before having it as a preprint, is by contacting people that are in the field that you're working on, so that you share observations even before they're even presented or even before they're pre-printed. And I think that serves multiple purposes. One, it makes them curious about what type of data and results you're generating and observations, and how it even impacts their own research programs. It also makes them interested, and therefore they might be also interested in collaborating with you. And then maybe that you can piggyback on that for, say, a letter of recommendation or invitation for a meeting or something like that. It also allows you to have control of the people that you're sharing the work with, and helps them remember you when maybe you're submitting an application later on as a faculty to that institution. So there's a lot of ways that I think you can have control in how you share the science, and in ways that I think are tangible, that maybe don't require you to just overdo it in a way that it might hurt you, and it might be hard to figure that out in the moment, but then you learn later on that you could have done it differently. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, I think it's just contact the people in your field and try to get them to pay attention to your work.
Thing that I would add on top of this, and I would never advocate against, people knowing your work. That's obviously always going to be a good thing for you. I suspect the department that I ended up joining, I don't think that they were probably particularly familiar with the work that I was doing. I think it was probably pretty far afield from what the things that they would have been caring about at the time. So certainly don't view it as, if you don't think that you've publicized yourself enough that you won't be qualified for any of these jobs. I think that, and this is something I'm guessing will come up later in this panel as well, but you have plenty of opportunity when you're putting together your research proposal that you're submitting for your job applications to demonstrate what you've done. And really that's just another way of communicating and publicizing your research to people that maybe aren't familiar with like the specificities of your field, but you can sort of convince them of what you've done in the past. And it's not, you can sort of overcome that even if people haven't necessarily heard of your work previously.
One thing I can add is that, I think publicizing your work is most helpful to get the interview, and after that it's mostly about your job talk and your interactions with the committee members and everything else, your chalk talk. So if you think about it that way, then maybe you can have more targeted, maybe even in your application you can even publicize your work and say, I did this was a great discovery. So that way, you can think of it how it can help you to get the interview. If your PI, for example, knows one person in the committee member who might be interested in your work, your PI can help also, publicize your work. So you need to think about it as strategically and think about how this can help you get the interview. So you can do it personally, social media, reaching out to the committee members. Your PI would be actually more effective if he or she can or want to help you in that sense, to kind of publicize your work as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you all for your great insights so far. At the same time, we have received some questions from the audience, and I will pass to Corinne to lead our exciting Q&A session next.
Thank you, Menglong. So now I'm going to ask some questions from the audience, and some of these questions have been combined to answer as many as we have, but right now we have about 4. So the first question is, what is your perspective on the number of postdocs or the length of postdocs? And for instance, if you have 2 scenarios where there is a postdoc, someone who has multiple postdocs versus someone who has a short postdoc, what advice would you have in terms of how they can navigate the job market? So for instance, how would you present, if you're giving a job talk, how would you present your postdoctoral work if you had multiple postdocs versus had a very short postdoc that was a continuation of your dissertation?
I think that, so rule of thumb, I think for job talk is that less is always going to be more in terms of what you present. If you give a job talk and you're talking about 4 to 5 different experiences, it's probably not going to be a good job talk. It's fine to maybe mention them very briefly in passing on the first slide where you say, I've been involved in some of these directions, in other experiences, but today I'm going to focus on, say, my last postdoc experience and how that specifically, assuming that that last postdoc position is what is launching you to your independent career, focus on that and how it sets you up for the future. So that's for the multi-postdoc experience. The short postdoc experience, which there's a few combinations of that. You did your PhD and then you're now doing your postdoc, but it's a short postdoc. Just phrase it, then you phrase it as a combination of your thesis defense talk to some extent, like a very concise version of that, how that led you and what was the rationale for wanting to stay in your grad school lab as a postdoc, and how that decision by itself positions you in a unique way for your long-term career. But both of those, I cannot stress this enough, don't overdo it in terms of how many things you present. Just keep it as simple as possible, because 9 out of 10, or maybe 9.5 times out of 10, the talk that is just covering too many things in diffuse ways or disconnected, it's not going to be the best one.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, what is your, so I'm going to combine this. This actually was originally 2 questions. What is your best tip for negotiating a faculty appointment offer? And or what is one specific thing that you found most surprising while going through the process of becoming a faculty member?
I can add one thing here, and that's not about the surprising part. It's just about what is it that is most important. Negotiate what you really need. Not like, I want more money. That's not good. You would not look good. It doesn't make sense. You have to think strategically, what is it that you really need to start your lab? Do you need 2 hoods? Do you have more cell culture? Do you need some space in animal facility? Do you need, do you need to have access to microscopy? Do you need to do some sort of imaging? What is it that you need so that you can start your lab in a successful way? That is your point, and then everyone will be receptive to what you ask for. So if you have that in mind, then you can actually negotiate that, I need this.
Yeah, I would agree with that totally. I went through this, a year or so ago, and I would say this kind of ties into the second part of the question as well in terms of what's surprising. It was surprising to me what was negotiable and what was not, and how opaque sometimes it was about which of those was which. What I found to be really helpful was talking with other junior faculty that had recently been hired, as well as anybody else that if you're aware of, is maybe being hired at the same time, because oftentimes there are these like sort of opaque unknowns that are possible for negotiation, whether it's directly related to your research program or whether it's related to something like relocation or salary or anything like that. There's oftentimes things that are on the table that you wouldn't think were on the table, and you'll never know that unless you ask somebody. And the good thing is that almost in every case, your departmental colleagues are going to be 100% on your side and want you to get everything that they got, if not more. And so your department that you're joining will be a really great resource for letting you know, like, maybe there's some things that are just totally not negotiable. What are the things that are negotiable, and how can you approach those in a way that's reasonable, whether it's for science or for your personal support, in whatever way that comes across. So I found that to be really helpful.
Thank you. Okay, so
Maybe if I could just quickly add while you decide on the next question.
Sure.
Thing that Ryan mentioned and Mohammed as well. So salary, I think, unless you know for sure that institution, that's what people are negotiating on, I would not think about doing that, because you're essentially asking to create an inequality by asking for a higher salary when maybe that's not negotiated. So just related to that. The second one is that instead I would focus on things that relate to family, right? Let's say your science and everything is all set. Sometimes, there are things that your family needs, maybe access to a daycare slot. Sometimes those are hard to come by, or maybe some support in that sense, economic support for a daycare, or things, relocation, or things that relate to life that are sometimes not necessarily written in the letters. Sometimes those things are negotiable, housing support or things like that. And those are, I think, to some extent more flexible and equitable in a sense compared to salary negotiations.
Thank you. Okay, so these are two separate questions that I'm trying to combine. And the first one is, in your opinion, what are the top 1 to 2 most influential factors that can shift a no into a yes when the job search committee reviews applications? And in this case, what if the applicant has a research project where they have some difficulty in telling their research story?
It's an interesting question because it has multiple levels and multiple possibilities. But in terms of, I think, things that are like a switch, when you have a candidate that you are really interested in, but you still haven't reached the final ranking of who's the top, who's the second, etc. Couple of things to know, and I think they're kind of practical, but also, I don't know, depending how you see it. If you already know, or you find out that candidate is very close to making a decision or very strongly being recruited by some other institution, then you essentially recalibrate your urgency and try to go for that candidate, and maybe try to get an idea of whether it's might be a yes or no faster than the whole process. So some of these things are set in stone, deadlines, you need to consult with a dean, provost, etc. But there are ways that you can accelerate the process to some extent. The flip side is also true. So sometimes you might have your top candidate, and then you realize that, or you find out that candidate has already said yes or promised to go somewhere else. And to me, that usually looks very bad, and it would totally flip the switch on the other side unless an offer has already been made. So think about those. I think, of course, the other practical one that I think applies in some institutions is that if maybe publications are not ready, and your paper just got in and all the decisions haven't been made, or your most important work was just published, that could flip a switch in some institutions, because sometimes there are certain guidelines that an institution requires in terms of published work and things like that, which I think are flexible, but some places have these set in stone. So I think things like that, I think could flip a switch in a yes, no.
Thank you so much. Here's another question. So we actually have 2 more that I can see right now. So during interviews, what are the most important questions that a junior faculty can ask? What are the most important questions that an applicant can ask to a junior faculty?
Are you happy? That, I think, is the first one. Maybe you guys can do a second one, but I think that should be the top one.
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. Yeah, I would say, how is life as a junior faculty here? This is the same question. Yeah. So you want to know, do we have enough support for a junior faculty or not? And then is there, good mentoring? Do you get enough time from the senior people? Do you have the supporting environment that would allow you to focus on your research to begin with? How is the collaboration here?
So it could be insightful to ask them what they wish they would have been asking when they were in your shoes? Because I think some things will come up that maybe you are not anticipating depending on the department and the institution. So that can be useful.
You very much. Okay, so this question is also combined, and then after this, I just want to ask for any final comments, so we're nearing the end. But this question is about the role of a postdoctoral advisor versus the role of a PhD advisor. So part one, if you don't have a letter from your PhD advisor, do you need to address this somehow? And part two, how much does a postdoctoral supervisor play in the role of helping you to get a job other than giving a letter of recommendation? And can you navigate the job market least successfully on your own?
Maybe I can just ramble. I don't know. It's a red flag if you don't have a letter from your PhD advisor, just to be clear. So addressing that in a way is important, because why wouldn't you have a letter from your PhD advisor? Unless it's a known, public conflict, or unfortunately your PhD advisor passed away or something like that, it will be a red flag. In terms of support from your postdoctoral advisor, I think, well, first of all, it will be very hard to do this on your own without having any support. And I think support has many definitions. At a minimum, you want to have a strong letter of recommendation, and to some extent, the green light from them to apply. I've seen or heard of situations where someone just decides to apply for faculty without telling the postdoc advisor, and I think that is also a red flag. And it's not going to be a good situation unless there was some issue that's known, and so always try to have the support. And I think it's also important to have the green light from your postdoc advisor, because it's work that you did in that lab, and you're building your career off of work from that lab to some extent. So you want to make that as clear as possible. Otherwise, this whole thing could backfire, and you might not get the support that you want to get.
Thank you, Dr. Sanchez Rivera. In interest of time, I'd like to ask if there's any burning words that any of our panelists would like to share before we close today's session.
I just wanted to add one thing about the previous question. We should have this mentality that our PhD advisors and postdoc advisors, they actually want us to succeed. So, and then when you argue and then your postdoc advisor says, I think you're not ready, maybe they're right. Maybe, you're actually not ready. So it's good that, I understand sometimes people want to keep people longer in the lab, but for most of the time, I would give benefit of the doubt to the PI that, they actually want you to be successful, so they can tell you, for personally, when I wanted to apply, the very first time I wanted to apply, my postdoc advisor told me, I don't think you're quite there yet. And I disagreed with him, but now I totally agree that I was not ready at that time, and I became ready like a year after. So it's, you may at that time think you're ready, but your PhD advisor, they have more experience, they've seen people, they know how is job market, so, and you probably won't get interviews in the same place for two years, so you don't want to lose that chance. So it's good that you actually understand this dynamic, and they actually and know that they want you to succeed. It's good for them too. It's a good reputation that you get a faculty position as their trainee. So
thank you, Dr. Rashidian. So we have approached the end of our panel discussion. I would like to thank everyone and give a huge hand to our panelists for taking the time to share their insights with us, and thank everyone for participating. I hope you found the panel discussion helpful. And we will now take a short break, and the next session will start at 3:30, fellow session 2 on brain and behavior. Please look out for the rest of our sessions, and thank you again to our panelists.